Welcome to the Wood Whisperer March Guild build. This is our Woodworkers Fighting Cancer attempt here, where we're all going to build these side tables and we'll be contributing money to the American Cancer Society. I wanted to take a minute in this first introduction to really just talk about my design. The initial idea is to build a simple shaker table, and I really like that idea because the form is so very simple and allows for a lot of embellishment, a lot of your own personal signature on it, if you will. The design that Mark Spagnuolo is highlighting in his videos is essentially this table. It's a very simple shaker side table, and this is a table that I actually built early 2009, and it's built based on the plans that Christopher Swartz put together in Woodworking Magazine. Obviously I've painted it and did a black lacquer finish on it, but it's the exact same style. And what I like about it is you can change just the tiniest little things in it and completely change what that style looks like. For instance, if you were to, say, not taper the legs, maybe add a corner bracket and a little bit of cove and bead molding around the legs, you get something very much like this. You might remember this from David Mark's Woodworks. This is a Chippendale style table. And very little has changed. The dimensions are basically would be the same, and you've got an entirely different style. Imagine now, go ahead and retaper the legs and take it back to its original shaker format, but then add some stringing and some inlay. And you've got a Hepplewhite style table. Same general form, just slight changes in it, more closer to the original shaker style. Now take those tapered legs and turn them and read them, and you've got a Sheridan Federal style piece. So now let's take the taper out of those legs, bring them back to kind of big and clunky, maybe add some slats on the sides. You've got a stickly style, or heck, throw some cloud lifts into the apron and some ebony pegs, and you've got green and green style. Again, same general form. So with that in mind, I was inspired by what you could really do with this simple form. And this is the full-scale mock-up drawing I have behind me. And essentially I have the tapered legs, but I have a tapered turned leg that is achieved by turning with an eccentric center. In other words, that's 2 center points to get this tapered effect. It's got the general appearance of a cabriole leg with the pad foot and everything. Throw some scroll work into the top and an OG molding detail around the front, and throw kind of a bat-winged hardware on the drawer. You've got a very simple Queen Anne style table. In fact, this is a little bit more low country southern Queen Anne because it doesn't have the full cabriole legs. It's more of a simple turn cabriole leg. And actually my design, I mocked it up obviously based on dimensions of the original shaker table, but it's inspired by this piece that I found in the Baltimore Museum of Art. And you could see Queen Anne styling, basically the same form. So that's what I think is really, really fascinating about this table, and I hope that those of you out there in the guild are building along and exploring your design options, and those of you not even in the guild or just regular viewers of my show, please enjoy this build and think about your next piece and what you can slightly change in it, keeping the form the same but changing the style completely. So let's start breaking down the stock. One of the reasons I like roughing stock out by hand is it allows you to play with the grain a lot more and also to maximize the yield of your boards. This is a cutoff from that 12-inch wide piece that I'm using for the top, and I'm going to get a couple apron pieces out of it. And the width here is as it is, this board is perfect for pulling out 2 aprons down the middle. But because I've got this sapwood intrusions here, it's getting a little tight and getting really close. Now, if I were to, say, take this over to the table saw and just rip a straight line down here, Obviously, you know, the sapwood is wider up here than it is down here, and I'm going to cut off some of the heartwood. Same thing goes over here. Straight line, you're going to lose some of that heartwood. It's not that much you're losing, but at the same time, when I'm trying to squeeze 2 aprons out of this 12-inch wide piece, I've only got about 1/4 of an inch to spare once I remove the sapwood. So one of the things I can do is essentially, instead of cutting the aprons in half right down the middle, if I were to actually kind of tweak the angle of the board so that I'm cutting a straight line along with this sapwood. So now I've got the grain flowing really vertically and I'm maximizing the yield of wood. Now certainly you could set up a taper jig on your table saw to match this angle. You could rough it out on a bandsaw if you want, but I find that it's, you know, just as easy to sit here with a rip saw, follow this line. You can square it up, true it up with a hand plane a little bit later, but I'm going to save myself, well, instead of only having about 1/4 of an inch to spare when I cut down the middle, I'm going to have more like 1/2 an inch by saving this space, and I'll be sure that I can get 2 aprons out of this stop. I'll set the board on my saw bench so that it's at the angle I'm looking for. This sap line that I'm going to cut is parallel to the edge of the bench, and that's just mainly for kind of body mechanics as I line my cut up here. Now this would be a nice place for using a panel gauge, because what I can do is reference off this straight edge and get a consistent parallel line all the way down. I'll do it kind of the old-fashioned way. Old-fashioned way. Panel gauge, I suppose, would be the old-fashioned way. I know that I'm going to need at least 9.5 inches to give me some little bit of extra fudge room once I rip this down the center and I plane and true all the edges. So I'll mark 9.5 inches from this reference face and just line up a straight edge on that. Working with woods like walnut and mahogany and darker woods, I really like these white grease pencils. The lines show up really nicely. So now I've got a line that's parallel to this edge that I just cut that's outside the sap line. And, you know, a little bit of waste up here, but again, we're talking about 3/8 of an inch at most. So let's line up our new cut line parallel to the edge of the board and make her cut. Now I like to start my saw at a nice low angle to make sure I'm tracking on that line, especially when you're cutting at an angle to the physical edge of the board. Whether you know it or not, your eye wants to be parallel to the physical edge. You're looking at it and, you know, I'm in here in the cut and it just feels wrong because I can see that I'm coming at this weird angle. So, you know, you can focus on the line you've already cut, but just for extra measure, I'll come in using a nice low angle. Kind of set the kerf along that line. And now, go back to the typical 60-some degree ripping angle. And you see, the saw is just going to follow the path of least resistance right down that curve. Now, you can keep sawing at this angle and feel pretty confident about it, or you can continue to essentially scribe along that line. Now have a board that has parallel edges or very close to parallel. Obviously I'll need to cross cut it in order to bring these edges square. Now let's just over to the bench with a hand plane to true up and ensure that these edges are square. Although if your sawing technique is good, they should be pretty close to square already. And they are. Good. So that's that. I've got my stock all prepped. And really, I think there's, working entirely by hand, there's a lot of misconception that, the milling process can be real drudgery. And, certainly it would be faster to run it across a wide bed joiner and run it through a thickness planer, but you'd be surprised where you can save time because of the fact that this table doesn't need to have inside faces that are perfectly flat. We're not referencing anything off those inside faces. So what I'm looking for is a perfectly flat outer face, which I have here. And then the inside face, I got it relatively flat. This is my cut line here. It's relatively flat, but is it perfectly parallel to this face? Probably not. It may be close, but that's really not important. This is my reference face, this is my show face that everyone's going to see. I'll be referencing my joinery marks off of this face. So, I'll reference in for the tenon. If it's not quite parallel on this side, it's not going to make that big of a deal. So you can see that essentially if you look at period pieces of furniture, if you're able to get underneath the top or inside the carcass, you'll see scrub plane marks on the inside. It doesn't have to be perfectly flat. Or even perfectly parallel to the inside face, as long as you pay attention to your reference marks. And I'll continually reference my reference marks throughout this build, and I'll try to draw attention to it whenever I do, so you can see why it wasn't necessary to have everything perfectly parallel. You can certainly go that way if you want, but it's probably going to take me another hour to get the opposing faces perfectly flat and parallel to the reference face. It's really not necessary. Same thing goes with the pieces for the top. I'll be joining these together, and the bottom face, well actually I shouldn't say, this is where I've got to pay a little bit more attention. The bottom face does need to be flat because obviously it's going to be referencing against the tops of the legs and you don't want it rocking. And you do, in this case, want it parallel to this face because you're going to be putting a molding around the edge, and if the thing's kind of canted to the right, it's not going to look that great. So this is the one instance where we do need parallel and flat faces on both sides. So we'll pay a little bit more attention to that. What I've done is flattened these boards on both faces and made them parallel to one another. Then I'll do the glue up, and I'll go back and I'll do the whole thing again. So it's not, super imperative that they be, exactly the same and square and ready to go yet until I've got it glued together. Then I can flatten the whole top together. And then From there, I can cut it close to size, so I'm not dealing with all this extra wood and having to flatten that at the same time. So these are my two pieces at the top. This is my, my back apron. This will be cut into my two side aprons. This piece is actually the lower front rail that I'll have the scroll work cut into. And then this is actually my drawer front. It's a different piece from all the rest of the wood because it's got a little bit more figure, some kind of purple and chocolatey tones in it, so it's my showpiece. I'm also going to rip a piece out because my drawer front, I don't know exactly the size yet until I have the case built, but my drawer front's anywhere from 3 1/4 to 3 1/2 inches. I've got a 6-inch wide piece here, so I'm going to go ahead and rip out my top rail for that piece as well. Now, yes, this board came from a different board that the rest of the piece came from, but the finish I'm going to do on this ought to blend a lot of those together, so I'm not particularly concerned. Plus, I'm only dealing with a very small 3/4 inch strip that will be primarily in shadow from the top. So the fact that this is not the same board, exact same coloring, it's close, but it's not the same. I'm not terribly concerned about that. So that's it, folks. The milling is done. We're ready to start roughing these to a little bit more final sizes and then cutting the joinery. So in the next episode, we'll get into joinery.